Here's one of my cards. Draw near to Papa. You have a powerful story to share. Just say yes. Papa is not done with you. Come near to God and He will come near to you. He will show you even more. He's not done because He loves you too much.
White Lake Men's Ministries welcomes Jerry Lind.
How about a nice round of applause for Jerry?
Yeah, thank you. I think he told you about John Denver, so my talk is just about done. So. Thanks, guys. Cal prayed for our troops, and I just take one short second here to remember this is 82 years since D-Day. Pretty big deal. And I've been watching some of those little videos of World War II guys that are visiting Normandy, and some of the French guys from towns there that are as old as they are, 100 years, greeting them and saying, we don't forget that you came for us. So anyhow, just keep that in your minds too as you think of all of our troops around the country, around the nations. Okay, I'm here primarily because, in fact, in this very place, maybe some of you were here when Mike Skipper, a district court judge from Barry County, came and spoke. And one of the things that he did at the end of his talk was encourage you to be saying yes. And if it's something that you're invited into and that could encourage someone or be a part of somebody's life in a positive way, just say yes. Well, Cal's been after me for a long time, and I gotta warn you guys, I know there's some of you here that Cal's been after. He's a patient man. If you think you can get away from him, you won't be able to get away from him. He'll keep after you. And he had done that with me, and that talk that morning really nudged me. And as we often do after the time here, we went over to the homestead and had breakfast, and I sat down and I decided, okay, I'm going to get this done right now. And I said, Cal, in front of the judge, I'm telling you yes. And I didn't have to elaborate. He knew exactly what I was talking about. And Ariel, I wish you had been there, because to take pictures of him, he just about fell out of his chair. I mean, he went, really? I said, yeah, really, we're going to just say yes today. And so we picked a time, and I did the first one of these at Grant Men's Ministry. And that was a good time. And it's opened the door to some other things. And here I am at White Lake. And I've enjoyed coming up here just because I come to see Cal and have learned to know at a distance some of you guys, and it's just been a good time. So I saw Mike last Wednesday night at a place where he was doing a presentation, and I told him how I'm holding him accountable for this. So if this doesn't go well today, it's on Mike Skipper, okay? This whole thing kind of started, I was raised in rural South Dakota, and in the spring of 1966, we had a blizzard out there. How old would I have been then? I was 16 years old. We had a blizzard that left 40-foot snowdrifts on the open prairie. I'm in small town South Dakota. Long story short is I found my way to a Civil Defense Emergency Operating Center, where I was put to work answering phones and keeping track of bulldozers and scrapers and loaders and trucks and snow throwers, and as they did the dig out operation. While we were doing that, we talked often with a fella that had an airplane. Of course, one of the first places they opened up was the local airport, and he had an airplane, and he would often go out flying. It was part of his business, and he would always call us and talk to us and say, is there anything you want me to look at, anything you want me to check? And so we talked with him frequently. And 3 or 4 days into this, it was kind of settling down. We were getting a handle on stuff, and he came into the Emergency Operations Center and said, hey, young man, do you want to go for an airplane ride? I said, well, sure, absolutely. And that was kind of the beginning of, little did I know where that was going to lead. But so I wound up starting to take some flying lessons, and I'll try to do a little show and tell here this morning. My first flying lessons, and I don't know if any of you see this, we'll put them over here for later, but was in a Piper Super Cub. Fun airplane, two pilots, one in front of the other. Airplane is covered with fabric, and that was my first flying lessons. And again, little did I know where this was going to lead me, but we did that. Wound up, had a couple of hundred hours of flying time, private pilot's license. I was in college and studying mechanized agriculture. I thought I was going to be connected with the farming community there, and but I was playing around more than I was studying, and I knew I was going to fail a class, and at that time it was better if you dropped the class than if you failed it. So I dropped a class and unwittingly became a part-time student. And this was Vietnam era, late 60s, and I knew that you had a deferment from the draft if you were a full-time student. I knew that it wouldn't take the Army very long to find me and draft me. I figured 6 months maximum I would be drafted. Well, I had some friends that had gone through, a couple of them who had gone through what was called a Warrant Officer Flight Training Program, and they found out about me and they contacted me. They said, don't let them draft you, join up, go ahead and sign up, and then the Army will be obligated to let you take pilot training if you sign up first. Beat them to it. So I did that, and wound up in the Army training as a helicopter pilot. Graduated first in my class, also kind of inadvertently, but I was enjoying that training, and as a result of that, I was offered any school that I wanted for additional training, and there were several. There was Cobra gunships, there was medevac, there were different things, and I wound up picking the big boy, the CH-47 Chinook, which at the time was the heavy lift helicopter, still is the heavy lift helicopter. It's been in service now for almost 60 years, and they, with of course improvements from when I was flying it, but they expect that aircraft will continue to fly as a heavy lift aircraft for the Army for at least another 40 years. So it's a pretty interesting and magnificent aircraft. A lot of fun to fly. I really enjoyed flying it. And there's my connection to Larry, who we've become friends because of Cal. Larry survived a CH-47 crash. They had a control issue, and Larry is still here. So that was a fun conversation that we had, Larry. You'll have to tell that someday. That'll be part of your story. Yeah. Just say yes. I'm telling you. Okay. So out of the training in the Chinook, I got assigned to South Korea instead of to Vietnam. That was also a short tour, what we called short tours then, and so I went to South Korea, had a pretty good time there. We were the only Chinook company in all of Korea, so we flew lots of different kinds of missions. We flew from the DMZ to the South Coast and east to west, and that was very interesting. Had a lot of fun with that. Just didn't know what kind of stories to pick out of there, but one of them that really stuck out to me was how we were supporting our troops there. We had 50,000 troops in Korea. Still do have, I think, around 40,000 troops there. And but instead of being in a combat place, which at one point in my life I kind of struggled with that I wasn't there with the guys that I'd gone through flight school with, but I've worked that through with the help of some friends. Sam, thank you. But learned that I went where they told me to go, and that in that I was serving our soldiers with this helicopter. And one of the things that happened, it was a fun story. We were doing resupply at a artillery site out on one of the coasts that was really, really in the boondocks. And it was an artillery site which was primarily a missile site, and they had nuclear missiles there. And we were resupplying them, and a staff sergeant came up to me one day and said, "Mr. Lynn, I need a generator really bad. And the Army procurement process is bypassing me, and I'm having trouble getting this generator. But I know where one is, and it's sitting there, and I don't think anybody knows it's there, because I've been watching it." And he wanted me to snag that thing, and I told him, "I'll tell you what, Sarge, I'll give you a sling, and if you'll rig it, I'll get it one day when I'm on a mission that overflies that area." And sure enough, about 3 weeks later, I got a message that the package was ready. And it was a few days later, maybe a week or 10 days, we were in the area. We snagged that generator, picked it up, took it to him, and the day we showed up with that, you'd have thought I gave that man $1 million. He was so excited, and of course, we walked on water after that. It was a cool deal to do for him. So those were the kinds of things that I could go into all other ones, and I'll run out of time because I know that I'm already going to run out of time. So I'll just leave it at that. Out of Korea, I was transferred and assigned to Fort Hood for a stateside time, and it was very interesting that at Fort Hood, even though Vietnam was still going on, it was starting to wind down, but it was still going on, and they were training at Fort Hood for desert warfare. Somebody somewhere had a hunch where our next war was going to be. Excuse me, and they were training for desert warfare there. Well, I got pretty lucky and wound up doing some instruction and instrument instruction, and so I wound up not having to be sleeping in tents out in the field, but I was working a regular shift and doing instruction in the morning one week and in the afternoon the next week, and I had a real cushy time at Fort Hood. It was really nice, and had some pretty cool experiences there doing that. One day we were stopped for fuel. I think it was in Austin, Texas, and I ran into some guys that were flying a Learjet, which at the time was a pretty cool airplane, still is, but they've gotten old, the ones that I started flying in. And I asked them about how do you do this, and they gave me the name of somebody, and I contacted them, and he was a part of a company called Executive Jet Aviation. And maybe some of you would know the name NetJets, because every golfer on the PGA Tour is wearing a NetJets hat, I think. But that was the company that became NetJets, and they had like 12 Learjets and 2 Falcon 20s. And I talked to them about training on a Learjet, and they were hesitant because they had never ever trained a helicopter pilot to get a type rating in a Learjet. But they were willing to give it a try. I did the training, came through that pretty good shape, and as a result of that, they offered me a job. And I still had to get out of the Army to take that, but it happened to be at a time when there was a reduction in force going on, and so I went and talked to them, and they said, well, there is a reduction in force happening. you're not the guy we would kick out. We are looking at your record, and we would hope you might consider a career in the Army as a standardization pilot. But the lure of high and fast overcame me, and so I left the Army and wound up at Executive Jet Aviation flying a Lear 23, which was a really hot airplane. It was quick. It would routinely climb to 41,000 feet in about 15 minutes. We were at 41,000 all the time, and at that time there was nobody else up there. It was just us. And to give you an idea of how fun this airplane was to fly, one of my instructors and one of the guys that I flew the line with occasionally had been an F-105 pilot in Vietnam, which was one of the hot airplanes then. And Dave told me that, he said the Learjet was designed by some Swiss engineers that Bill Lear had found that had worked on fighter projects, and that's kind of the airplane that he wanted. So it was designed with some fighter stuff in it. And Dave told me, he said, I could take a Learjet, and if we keep it apples to apples, that is, no afterburners and no supersonic, he said, I could out-dogfight any fighter aircraft in the Air Force's inventory with a Lear 23. And so if that gives you a little idea of it, it was a fun airplane to fly because it would really perform. Out of that, we flew some pretty interesting people. I've flown Ted Kennedy, flew John Glenn, astronaut and politician. Had one night we had Gale Sayers and Howard Cosell on the airplane together, and that was an interesting flight because we got Howard to come to and hooked him up with a headset, and he made some radio calls for us, and so that was a pretty fun experience, and Howard had a good time doing it. And ATC had a good time having that conversation with him. That was a fun night, one that was a lot of years ago, and I still remember it. Probably my favorite guy in my time at Executive Jet was John Denver. He was a really nice guy, took really good care of us. And if we were taking him to a place where he was doing a concert, he always made sure we had tickets, got VIP treatment. He was just a good guy to be around. He was a pilot also, and he was building his time and getting into more sophisticated airplanes. And he wound up flying a Learjet with his dad. And so that was pretty cool for us to see the progression of that and to have him be a part of that. Probably my least favorite guy, if you're a baseball fan, you may recognize the name George Steinbrenner. Well, George was the owner of the Yankees, and when we flew him, we weren't rarely on baseball business. We were on shipbuilding business where Steinbrenner made his fortune, but he was, I'll just be honest, he was a pain in the ass. He just was not fun to fly. And occasionally we'd see a mission coming up, or if we got assigned, if we're out on the road, here's your trip number, lead passenger George Steinbrenner, and we'd roll our eyes, go, oh crap, because we knew this was not going to be a fun day. So George was my least favorite passenger. EJA, probably the most interesting guy that I got to be acquainted with and actually learned to know him and had a good time with, that was a fellow named Paul Tibbets. And if any of you are history buffs, you might know or remember that Paul Tibbets was the pilot that flew the Enola Gay, which was the airplane that dropped the bomb on Hiroshima. And Paul was an interesting guy to talk to. He was willing to talk about what happened at Hiroshima, how that mission all built up. The secrecy behind it in the planning stages was unbelievable. And he has a book called, I was going to bring it with me and I forgot, called, the name of it is Enola Gay, and Enola Gay was the name of his mother, and it's a really interesting read if you ever have an opportunity to pick it up and read it, because it tells some of the history of that whole project and how it came about. But Paul was the vice president of operations at Executive Jet Aviation, so got to know him as a employer-employee relationship and had many occasions to talk with him, flew several trips with him, and he was just an interesting guy to be around. So there was my most interesting guy. Learned something about, as a young guy in the corporate business world now, business jet world, that the efficiency of airplanes and what that brought to our travelers. And one night it was late, I don't know, 10:30 or 11 o'clock, and we had a mission to fly a guy from Mansfield, Ohio to one of the New York airports, probably Teterboro. And he came to the airplane, and I asked him, I said, do you mind if you could help a young guy who's just getting going in this thing? How do you justify the expense of flying you from here to New York versus an airline ticket? And just help me to understand what I'm getting into here. And he said, young man, he said, you picked a right time to ask me this. He said, today I was in meetings with a company that we're all trying to get business with, and I was there with most of my competitors. And toward late afternoon that day, he said, they all started watching their clocks. They probably had an airline flight to catch, or another meeting at another location, but they started doing this. He said, and I saw it, and I just relaxed. Wound up taking those guys to dinner by myself. We had more conversation, and I come to you today with a briefcase that has a signed contract for $5 million worth of business. And he said, that's how we justify this tonight. And I went, I got it, I understand. So that was an interesting experience. Did about 1.5 years with that company, and then I had an opportunity to get on with a little soap company called Amway. And at the time they had 2 airplanes. They were called Lockheed Jetstars, and they had 2 airplanes because Rich DeVos and Jay Van Andel, by company policy, were never allowed to fly on the same airplane. So if they were going to a meeting, something going on that they were both supposed to be at, couldn't fly the same airplane. They had to have 2 different airplanes. And so got started with them. The Jetstar was an interesting airplane. It was a cool corporate aircraft. It was one of the few airplanes I've flown that it was almost impossible to make a bad landing in that airplane. I mean, you had to really screw it up to get a bad landing in a Jetstar. And it had its roots as a military airplane, executive transport in the Air Force. And they built the airplane, and it had 2 engines, and they realized pretty quickly that it was underpowered with 2 engines. So with the military, what do? You just slap on a couple more engines, which they did. There was engines on the sides of the airplane. They just put 2 more engines on it. And then they realized, oops, now we got 4 engines sucking fuel, and we can't go very far. So they solved that problem by putting a couple of big fuel pods, and they put them on the wings. And I wish I had a picture of the Jetstar. It's kind of a neat looking airplane, but they put 2 big fuel tanks on the wings, and now they had the power and they had the fuel. And then I flew a corporate version of that airplane, and that was pretty interesting. Got to know the DeVos and Van Andel families, and we still every now and then run into some of those kids, but I knew them when they were kids, and that's always interesting to have a conversation about some of those times when we were together and they were just kids. Few more interesting people there. I'm probably one of the few guys in the world that saw Paul Harvey with his pants down. Now, I should probably explain that, you think? We picked Paul Harvey up in Florida, and he was going to speak for an Amway meeting the next morning in Texas. And he was at another event for another company, and so we had we picked him up to get him there on time, and it was late, 10:30, 11 o'clock at night. And he got on the airplane. He said, "Fellas, I'm really tired." He said, "I'm glad you're here to pick me up, but I'm going to take a nap, and I don't want to wrinkle my pants, so I'm going to take off my pants, hang them over the back of this chair, and I'm going to wrap up in a blanket and nap while we go to Texas." So that's how I saw a pantless Paul Harvey, and that's the rest of that story. So, but that was interesting. A couple other interesting guys that we flew. We were a part of Amway sponsored an Indy car. Scott Brayton was our driver. Drove with the Dick Simon Racing Team and had some real interesting stories around that. And this happens to be the 30th anniversary of Scott getting killed in an Indy car while he was practicing for the Indy 500 in Indianapolis. But he was a good guy. He was fun to be around. Pretty decent driver. I think if he'd have been able to get with a team that had more money than he had when he was driving for Dick Simon, I think he could have been a winning guy. But it was fun. Learned again at Amway more about the efficiency that airplanes provide for you. It's expensive, way more expensive than an airline ticket, but you also got a lot of work done. And one of my favorite stories is, and now there were more airplanes than just the two. We had began to accumulate airplanes. Amway believed in airplanes as business tools, and they bought 2 or 3 airplanes that were smaller and more fuel efficient, and told that executive team at the corporate headquarters, "Go out there and make this business happen. We bought you airplanes to do that, so go do it." And this particular trip, we were out for 3 days with a team that was, they were looking at smoke detectors that they were going to market in their catalog. And they were looking at vendors to produce that smoke detector. And we visited 5 vendors in 3 days. And at the end of the 3rd day, we're headed for Grand Rapids. They're in a space in the back of the airplane that has a work table on it. They're able to talk, converse, make decisions in private instead of being in a airline cabin where they had no privacy. And they, by the time they hit Grand Rapids, they had their decision formulated and the recommendation they were going to make to the next level up. And on top of that, we'd been out 3 days, and they now had Thursday and Friday in the office to do other work. So it makes them, what's the right word? Anyhow, it makes them more efficient as employees. We found out from them that they hadn't had the airplane and they had to do it on the airlines, that it would have taken them 5 days, and they only would have been able to visit 4 vendors instead of 3 days and 5 vendors. And so they were grateful for the airplane, and it showed off the efficiency of corporate aviation and what it could do for you. So near the end of my time with Amway, I got an opportunity to fly the Orlando Magic in an airplane that looked like that. That was called a Bach 111. Airline configuration. It was 85 passengers approximately, and so we got to fly them in the first year I flew them for 2 seasons. And the first guy the first year was the year that Shaquille O'Neal was a rookie, and have some pretty interesting stories about that. And I'll see if I can get this ball up here.
I got it.
Thanks, Cal. So, and among other things, we got a chance to have Shaquille do a ball for me. And it says, to Jerry, Shaquille O'Neal, number 32. And I learned that he could only sign Spalding balls. If you presented a Wilson ball to him, he wouldn't autograph it. And I think part of that was that Spalding was probably the official NBA basketball, was the deal on that, I think. But anyhow, and so this is kind of a cool memento for me. If it didn't, it's worth less with the to Jerry on it. If you just, it's true. If you had this ball and just his autograph, and you could authenticate that, that would make it a fairly expensive ball. But to Jerry lowers its value, and of course, to me, it has no value other than it's mine, and Shaq did that for me. So that's kind of a cool piece for me.
Yeah.
But quick story about Shaq. One day we were at a shoot around, and which was kind of a warm up and a practice for the team that we were playing on the road, and we were at a college gym, and we had a Sports Illustrated team with us, and they were doing a story about him, and they were getting ready to be done, and I was standing there with a team trainer, and we were about as far away from Shaq and the Sports Illustrated team that was flying with us to do a story, and they were as far away from me as you guys at this first table are. They were right there. And we heard Shaq say to the Sports Illustrated guys, how about if I go up there and tear that rim down for some pictures? And Lenny, the trainer, he heard that and kind of went, yike. And he walked over and intervened and said, no. You know, I think they signed Shaq for $14 million or something. And he said, we don't need you to get hurt tearing down a college basketball rim for pictures. And Shaq was agreeable to that. He was a pretty easygoing guy. And Lenny came back over and he says, you know, the reality is he could have done that without any problem. He was big, he was strong, he was about 4% body fat, and said he could have torn that rim down with no problem. And then, of course, we've all seen the highlight reels eventually of him tearing down NBA basketball rims and backboards and smashing them and breaking them. And they changed how they did that in their world. They redesigned backboards and rims because of Shaq tearing them down. So that kind of thing. During this time, and kind of jump into my faith journey here a little bit, I had been raised a Lutheran kid. I had a Sunday school pin about that long to prove it, and I looked for that pin, but I couldn't find it. But anyhow, that was my proof that I was a good Lutheran, and then I kind of walked away from it when I got into college and into the military, and it just wasn't going real well there. But and then in 1985, I was going through a really nasty divorce, and wound up going to a crusade in downtown Grand Rapids called the Live 85, and I knew that God was calling me to come forward and give my life to Him. Now, of course, I had so much pride that I went to give my life again, to re-up, so to speak. But I knew this was the first time. It was when we were going to mean business with giving my life to the Lord. Well, that led to some good conversations, and here's one of my kind of a God story, was that we had a trip in this Bach 111 airplane that I showed you a picture of, and in order to start that airplane, you had to have an APU running for air to start the engines. And another pilot and I got called out for a trip, kind of a short notice deal, and we were standing there and getting ready to go, and the APU would not start. And the mechanics are frantically trying to figure out what's wrong, why won't this thing start? And Bruce stood back and he looked over there and he looked at me and he says, I can tell you that APU is not going to start. My daughter is critically ill, and I need to be with her tonight and not out on this trip. And that APU will not start. He said, there's an angel up there with a sword through that APU. And sure enough, we canceled the trip. He was able to be with his daughter, who had a really good recovery that night. She was doing better the next day. And the mechanics went out now to scratch their heads again and figure out why that APU wouldn't start. And they hit the start button and it started right up. No problems. So, you know, God working in our lives. Kind of a cool time to see that kind of stuff happen. While I was at Amway during that divorce time, this showed you the kind of the characters that I was working with. And Rich DeVos came into the cockpit one day as he was getting ready to leave on a trip. He knew I was having a rough time, and he handed me this Bible. And he said, just want you to know, he said, I know you're struggling, and this might help you. And it was just a quiet moment. He handed me the Bible, and that was the end of it. When he was close to dying, I got a chance to see him and showed him that Bible, and he lit up like a Christmas tree. He was so happy to see that I still had that Bible that he had given me. So, left Amway to chase a dream in South Dakota. Found out through a friend of mine that there was a crop spraying business that was for sale, going to be for sale right near my hometown. And the guy that owned the crop spraying business in my hometown was a high school classmate of mine, and we got to talking and decided I would come out, spray a season, get acclimated to that world. We would merge our two businesses, which would make them way more efficient. And so I had to leave Amway in order to chase that dream. Got out there, and here comes another God story for me. One day I was having kind of a struggle, and for whatever reason I was just really struggling, and I just in my head I went, Lord, help me, just be with me today. I'm in a running airplane with a helmet on, which has earmuffs, and you know it's a noisy environment. And out of nowhere, I heard the call and the song of a meadowlark. And I don't know if any of you ever heard a meadowlark, but they have a very distinct and a very beautiful song. And I heard it, and I kind of looked around, and I saw that meadowlark finally sitting on a fence post, probably 30 yards away. It was quite a distance, but I could hear that meadowlark as if it was dead quiet, and he was sitting on my hand. And that was, you know, just God talking to me. I'm here. I know you're here. I got this. I got you covered. I'm going to be with you. So that was kind of a neat story. Another one was the my very first pass in the crop spraying world. I'd done a little training with water, and then it came time to go to work, and I had a load of chemical on, and we were spraying a wheat field, and my very first pass had a little bit of a slope in it, going downhill, and at the end you had to kind of pull up, and I didn't realize there was a barbed wire fence on the end of the field, and I didn't get pulled up. I kind of kept sliding downhill. And my first pass with chemical on it was I hit a fence, hit that barbed wire fence. Now the airplanes are made to take out wire. They have wire cutters on the landing gear and on the windshield and places that you could get snagged up. But I knew that I'd hit the fence because I could look out behind me from the cockpit and see me. I was trailing barbed wire, and I had knocked a couple nozzles off the spray boom, and so I headed back, had a safe landing, got the thing fixed up, learned a good lesson. But I saw that as another God moment in my world, that, he was protecting me, he was teaching me, he was fathering me, he was showing me some things without me winding up hurt or wrecking an airplane. So that was kind of an encouraging time for me. The business deal fell through on that thing, and we wound up coming back to Michigan, and I was looking for work, and the network went to work for me, and a friend of mine at the airport called me and said, you ought to check in with Universal Forest Products, which is now called Universal Industries, but it's Universal Forest Products. He said, there's a rumor out that they fired their chief pilot, and he said, I'm pretty sure the rumor is accurate because he's the one who told me. So, okay, that's a pretty reliable deal. And so the short of that was that they wound up offering me a job to manage their flight department, and the CEO at the time said, you have two tasks for us to do. One of them is to make us safe. They knew that they had let this guy go too long, and he was doing some unsafe things, was kind of known around the airport for doing unsafe stuff. And then he got tangled up in another mess, which broke the camel's back, and they let him go. And so Bill said, you need to make us safe, and you need to get us into a jet airplane. They had a turboprop that was a pretty good airplane, but they needed more range, more speed to make their business grow better. And so we got that done. The safety part of it kind of came back to me when one day at a party where there were wives, a couple of wives came up to me and said, Jerry, we're so glad that you're here because we're not afraid anymore for our husbands to get on the airplane. And so I went, mission accomplished. I know that we got that part done. And then the airplane came along. It took us about 6 months to figure out the right airplane for them and find one. And this was kind of that was the first airplane that they had at Universal Forest Products. It's called a Sabreliner 65. And so again, these will be up here afterward if you want to come and look at them. But we did that. I'm going to run out of time, aren't I, Cal? So I'm going to skip a couple of interesting stories about business efficiency.
Why?
And because we want to get you out of here at 8 o'clock. That's Cal's promise to you guys. So I'll be glad to tell you later if you want to stop. I'll hang out a little bit, okay? Is that a good enough answer for you? Yeah, okay. Universal Forest Products made them safe. There we go. Retired about 11 years ago, and the aircraft I retired from was a really, really fun airplane. Now, this is a picture of it. It's called a Citation 10, and it was the flagship airplane for Cessna, and its claim to fame was fast. It was a .92 Mach airplane, which was the fastest non-military airplane in the world, and it was fun to fly. It was a good performer. It was quick. We kind of had some bragging rights about its speed, and one of them paid off. One day we were taxiing out for takeoff at Grand Rapids, and we were still at our hangar, and it was quite a long taxi to get to the runway to take off. And as we're taxiing out and just getting started taxiing, one of Amway's Gulfstreams was taking off, and it turned out that we were both going to the almost the same area on the West Coast. And so we got around the corner and took off. So we were quite a ways behind, and somewhere over Nebraska we caught up with that airplane, and we could see it. They were just a little lower than us, and we could see it. We didn't go smoking by it, but we passed him. And trust me, Bill Curry had bragging rights over Rich DeVos's fastest airplane. And if you don't think there isn't that kind of competition in their world, it's there, and it was fun to do that with that airplane. It's kind of interesting, just a little perspective on that. It's kind of numbers on a dial when you're at 41,000 feet or 45,000 feet. And recently I was with a guy who had flown fighters, the F-18, and now he's a Mach 2 plus guy, and we had some fun talking about my fastest airplane and his fastest airplane, and he kind of started to get the bragging rights with this group we were at, in fun. And then as we talked, we realized that quite a few years ago, Wilbur and Orville had the bragging rights for flying the fastest airplane in the world. So it's all kind of a matter of perspective, right? So touch on the spiritual journey again real quick. I had thought I had it here, but I don't. In 2003, I got introduced to the book Wild at Heart. I don't know if any of you have ever heard of it, but it's a great book. If you haven't, I recommend it highly. A friend of mine said, you got to read this book. My wife, Linda, was working at a big church with a big bookstore and had a big discount on books, and I asked her if she'd check this book out. And she kind of sheepishly reached around behind her and pulled a drawer out and said, I've been kind of trying to figure out how to get you to read this book. And it was Wild at Heart. She had it there. And of course, being the spiritual giant that I am, I immediately refused to read it. Oh yeah, she's trying to fix me now. Instead of my friend recommending the book, she's recommending the book, and it totally changed my perspective. I became a dummy. And Steph kept after me, and I finally read the book. And once I read it, I got hooked. And I learned there that before that, I was serving a tyrant God that was always angry about something. And if you read the Old Testament especially, God's always killing somebody because they pissed him off, And I never got to read it far enough to get to the place where he also provided redemption for all of those situations. But I just quit when he was killing people. And so I was struggling with this tyrant God. I was the dog in the hare and hound race that, it didn't make any difference how fast that old dog would run. We'll never catch that rabbit. And that was very discouraging to me. And then Wild at Heart taught me that, man, I got a loving Father who cares about me. He's nuts about me. He has a plan for me. And all he wants from me is just to love him and to let him love me. And it just changed my world spiritually. Since then, I've journeyed, especially in the Wild at Heart message, for 12 or 13 years. And then more recently, I got involved with some ministries called, one of them's Grace Explorations, which is kind of part of the deal where Cal and I met at a Tuesday night gathering that is a part of that ministry. Got involved because of that with Grant Men's Ministry, and here I am. Been involved with a ministry called Set Free and a ministry called The Roadmap. And the Roadmap is really interesting. They do a really cool event called The Road Home at a really beautiful ranch over by Big Rapids. And I would recommend it to any and all of you if you would go look it up. If you're a veteran, the cost is only $50. And it's a really, really neat event that'll help you to get set free. I'm going to spill over just a little bit. Am I okay? We okay with you guys if I spill over just a little? All right. If you need to go, please just feel free to get up and go. All right. But one of the things that they do without spilling too much of the beans on what they do at this event. While we're as participants off doing another project, the staff is praying for us. And they're praying for a word from the Lord about us specifically, but they don't know who they're praying for. In my case, they were praying for number 7 in the yellow group of guys. And so they had no clue. And so we got these cards, and here's one of my cards. Draw near to Papa. You have a powerful story to share. Just say yes. Papa is not done with you. Come near to God and he will come near to you. He will show you even more. He's not done because he loves you too much. Well, that's a cool message, but that could be, you could write that about just about anybody, right? When you think about it. Except the guy that did it, again, having no clue, doodled on the corner of my card, and you feel free to come up and look at it, but he doodled an airplane and a helicopter, not knowing that I just spent 45 years flying helicopters and airplanes. And if that's not a God indicator, I don't know what is. That was clearly God speaking through him to me about keep on going, don't you quit. And I saw other things that from other events that I've been at, and there's a theme that runs in there all the time. Don't quit, keep going. Don't settle for less. God's got you. He knows where you are. Even when you feel off, you're right on time. He's got you, and he's got it covered. And so that's a really good way to learn to live, that even when it doesn't seem right, God's right on time. So another quick God thing. This was after I had retired. My wife and I bought a motorhome, and we were traveling now the nation with a motorhome. So we were seeing the nation from the ground at 60 miles an hour instead of from 45,000 feet at 600 miles an hour. And that was a lot of fun. I was really enjoying that. Well, we were in Florida, and one night I was restless as I could be. And I didn't have any appetite, which you can tell that I'm very rarely without appetite. But no appetite, just restless. And I had one little uncomfortable spot right in the middle of my chest, about the size of a quarter. And but shrugging my shoulders. Finally, we decided, and my wife was on me a little bit, and then I knew she was right. And let's go get this checked. Went to an emergency room at what turned out to be one of the premier cardiac care facilities in all of Florida. And about less than 10 minutes into that visit in the ER, an ER doc put his hand on my shoulder and said, "Mr. Lind, I don't mean to alarm you, but things are going to really, really pick up here right now, because for what we can see here with our limited equipment, you're in the middle of a really, really serious heart attack." Really, no symptoms, no pain, no nothing except this little thing in the middle of my chest. And then I realized that they were serious when they wheeled me into a cath lab. And about 8 people, I'm laying there on the cath thing, and there's about, boom. And they are on me, and you can tell that it's urgent, and they're flying. And I kind of rolled my eyes toward heaven and said, "You know what? I wouldn't pick now, Lord, but I'm ready if this is it, if this is the time." Woke up in an intensive care unit. I was there for about, 12 or 13 hours. The next day, they took me back to the cath lab to do 2 more. They did 2 stints that night to stabilize me. And then they wanted to do 2 more later on a staged basis. And I went in and had that done. And one of the guys that was in that lab, I recognized his face on the second time around. And I said, they brought me in. Everybody looks at my chart, says I was really sick. And he said, "Is that true?" He said, "Yes, sir. You were pretty sick that night." He said, "I was here. You're right." And he said, "If you hadn't come in," and other people told me this later too. He said, "If you hadn't come in, you, in all probability, would have died in the night. Probably less than a 5% chance that you would have survived the night if you had not come in." Well, is that God not poking you and prodding you and getting you going, and then into a premier cardiac care facility on top of it? And I'm in the hospital for 3 or 4 days, and 2 days later, or 3, I was at a World of Outlaw race with some friends at the Volusia County Raceway in Florida, you know, and after the fact, I've been seeing a cardiologist regularly. There's no damage to my heart. Everything is cooking fine. And but that's God. It has to be. You know, there's how do you explain that? You can't. So that was another part of my God journey, if you will. I think with that, I'm going to stop. There's some stuff here that I kind of wanted to do, but I'm not going to, because Cal's got to get his contest done yet too. So anyhow, I just want to let you know that, you know, don't quit. Keep going and just say yes.